So hello everyone and welcome to She Came from Outer Space timepiece in half a press. Now first off, of course I will need to tell you guys why this is half an A press. I'm not saying this because I'm trying to meme, I'm saying this because it's actually half an A press. It's actually merely a coincidence that it manages to line up with the Super Mario 64 meme. So basically what happens when we enter this stage is that we're gonna need to do something at some point that requires us to hold down the A button. Now we don't actually need to press the A button being the jump button, but we do need to have it held down. Now what we can do is we can press the A button before the stage even starts. There will be a point during the loading screen where the in-game timer will come in. We will see the in-game stage timer to start rolling, and this is where the usual IL, which is individual level, begins, which is used for individual level speedrunning, for example. So whenever we talk about anything about a specific level, we only really talk about this specific period in between when the timer starts and when the timer for the stage ends. That is everything that is of concern to us. So if we press the A button before the stage starts and then have it pressed before the timer even begins and keep it pressed for the entire duration, then we have technically not actually pressed A during the level. If we zoom in on this part of where we just do the level, there is no A press anywhere in sight, we're just holding down the A button. Now you can of course argue that, well, if there's no A button press in this period, it's zero A press. Now this is something that you could argue, but to me this doesn't really seem very realistic when we talk about what's possible or what's not possible with the A button, because we are doing something that requires us to use the A button to some degree. We are using some part of the A press. We're not using the A button down, which is one half of the A press, but we're using the actual period of where it's pressed. That's the other half of the A press, because each A press is made up of two halves. The actual press, which makes you jump, and the held down part, which we will use for some other stuff later on. I'm not gonna talk about that yet. But because we only use half of what the A button press is consisting of, I would argue that this is only half an A press, but you could also potentially argue that if we're only talking about the actual press itself, it would be a zero A press. But when I talk about an A press, I talk about pushing the button down and having it held down until it is released. We have those two parts. And so now we can go back into our stage. And as you can see, I have this little gamepad viewer right here. Oh, that's the right direction. Where I'm actually taking a look at where I have all the different buttons that I'm pressing at any given point, and they will light up on that gamepad. And you can see that I'm having the A button lit up for the entire duration of this stage. Now we're going to come over here to these buckets, and we're actually going to throw one of the buckets, and we're going to throw it on top of the other buckets. Now, before I continue, we need to talk about parallel buckets. Once again, I'm not memeing, it's actually just a coincidence that this is what we're gonna have to talk about right now, and it has the word parallel in it. Now, the thing about how buckets work in this game is that usually, as you might imagine, each bucket has their own X, Y, and Z position in three-dimensional space. Now, they all have their own values, and there's nothing special about this, but what happens if we put one bucket on top of another bucket? What happens is that the bottom bucket, nothing happens with that one, but the top bucket now sort of gets linked to the bottom bucket, where it says that, okay, if the bottom bucket moves any sort of distance, we want the top bucket to move exactly the same way. So we say that, okay, for the top bucket, we will just copy the X, Y, and Z coordinates for the bottom bucket. That way, whenever the bottom bucket moves, the top bucket moves as well. But because the top bucket is not having the exact same location, I mean, it is a bit higher, it might be a bit shifted to the left, a bit shifted to the right, it might not be exactly on top of the other one. There is a bit of an offset on all these three coordinates going on as well. Now what happens if we bring HatKit into this entire thing? Now we have had Kid hold the bottom bucket, and as you might expect, if we just move it around, what happens is the top bucket just gets moved around exactly along the bottom bucket, as you might expect from real life. But the interesting part about this is that nothing actually tells us anymore that the top bucket really has to be directly on top of the bottom bucket. What we can do is, if the top bucket moves somewhere else and we move the bottom bucket, they're still linked, they're still gonna move exactly the same. So they're always gonna move parallel to each other in three-dimensional space. So for example, if we move head kit and the lower bucket to the right, then the top bucket will also move to the right. And if for some reason the top bucket gets wedged in some object or whatever and it can't follow along anymore, or it gets separated from us, doesn't matter, it's still linked, it's still gonna move exactly like we're gonna move if it can move in that direction. That's always something to notice. If either head kit or the top bucket runs into a wall, for example, it cannot move through there through normal circumstances, so it'll just not move at all. And that's gonna be very, very important. Now, right now, we're just gonna use this to carry both of these buckets through the stage, but we are gonna do something very, very special with these two buckets. Now, we're just gonna get both of these buckets, and I'm gonna have to do some weird movement where I'm gonna try and get them to the very top of this stage, where we're gonna scare the Mafia. Now, while I go ahead and have the video just running and of me playing this stage, all in real time, by the way, there's not a TAS or anything as you might expect. Like for example, when Pound and Kirk does his Super 164 0 press stuff, he always does it total assisted, mostly because he has to. But since all the stuff that we're doing, or at least almost all of the stuff that we're doing, can be done in real time, we're just doing it in real time. So the only thing I'm doing right now is I'm recording this camera and this voiceover in post and adding it on top of the gameplay. Anyway, while this footage is running of me getting the buckets all the way up, which by the way, we can climb ladders while carrying buckets, it just works. What we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and talk about how we're actually moving. So we're gonna use the ice bucket, and if we use the, not the ice bucket, the ice hat, and if we just tap the ice hat button, the left trigger, very slightly, what will happen is we will actually just go ahead and we will just jump into the head, into the air pretty much. It pretty much is kind of like a jump. So by just tapping the ice hat button, we do actually jump kind of into the air, because head kit, as she turns into ice, goes upwards a little bit, but because we tap it, it instantly gets cancelled, and so the only thing that's left is her upwards movement. And so if we kind of use that to try and jump, and something to note here also is that if we press the ice hat button for only one frame, what will happen is we actually go quite a bit higher than if we press it for longer than a frame. I'm not exactly certain why that is, but it's a nice little quirk. So what I'm always going to be doing is whenever I press the ice hat in order to jump, what I will do is I will try to tap it for only one frame. Now I haven't actually tested this exactly myself yet, but it seems like the gamepad viewer doesn't quite pick up on that. So if I press it for really just one frame, it might not even show up on the gamepad viewer over there. So that's something to look out for. Now the other part of movement that we're doing is, of course, we're using the dive. If we're using the dive, we can take we can jump some distances, cover some ground. We can also go ahead and use that to initiate a wall run, which is really nice. And between wall run, ice hat, dive, we can move around very nicely. Now if we do a wall run and we go to a ledge on that wall run, we will automatically jump on top of the ledge, which is really nice. So now we've made our way all the way over here to the end. And what we're going to do is we're going to just take a step and get ourselves really dirty and slimy, and we're going to go and just scare the guy. Nothing too special at this point. It was important that we brought the buckets over. So now that we scared the guy, we don't actually need to be slimy anymore. interestingly enough. She's still scared of us even though not slimy. But what we're gonna do right here is we're gonna need to try and get over there. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna use the no bonk badge. And we're also gonna use this little light that we have here. Now what we can do is we're just gonna go towards that light and we're gonna sort of wedge ourselves into the side of it and do a dive on it. Now if you take a look at this picture, what would happen if we were to do a dive into a solid object? Well, obviously we would bonk. But because we have the no bonk badge, what happens is instead we get, because we're not allowed to bonk, we just sort of slide over the surface, and because the light is angled in a specific way, it actually makes HatKit slide towards the sky, and we actually keep most of our momentum. And by doing that, we basically do a really big jump upwards into the sky, which allows us to go really far, and we can actually clear the distance. Now, some people might already be like, wait a second, why didn't you grab the ledge? More on that later. Anyway, right now we were actually able to make it over to the other side, but right now, after we scared the Mafia again, we have a bit of a problem. You see, there's this jump that we need to make right here, and this jump is actually pretty difficult. As it turns out, even with all the special moves that we've sort of figured out how to get around in 0A button land, we can't actually clear that jump, and we can't even reach the ledge, or in fact we can't even grab onto the ledge. If we could grab onto the ledge, maybe we can make something work, but we can't even do that. So as it turns out, we kind of need to get up to that Mafia. Now, how do we do that? How do we get up to that Mafia? Well, we can get back very easily to where we jumped off of, and we have buckets. Yes, we get some buckets. So what we're gonna do right here is, by the way, I'm gonna cut out my failed attempts of bucket flying here, but I will, in the description of this video, I will link an uncut version of this entire video where you can see uncut from start to finish, so you can see that I'm actually doing everything in real time, and you will see all the different fails that I have in there as well. Anyway, so what we're gonna do with the buckets is we're gonna answer a question. What actually happens if we stand on top of one of the buckets while holding the other one while they are linked up? So imagine back our old point where the bucket with the crabs in this case is the one that is linked up, and we now somehow manage to stand on top of it. Well, let's just look at this example. What happens if HatKit with the bucket that we're holding is moving upwards? Well, if we're moving upwards, then obviously, because the other bucket is linked to us, also has to be moving upwards. But if the bucket that is below us is moving upwards, then it's pushing us upwards, meaning that we're now moving upwards again. But if we're moving upwards, then the bucket below us is also moving upwards. But if the bucket below us is moving upwards, it's pushing us upwards, meaning we're moving upwards. So you can kind of see that this basically means that any single movement we do, I mean, if we go left and right, or if we turn in a circle, the exact same thing happens as well. We're moving in a circle, so the bucket below us is moving in a circle, therefore we're moving in a circle, and you kind of get this feedback loop where every single movement that happens while you're standing on this bucket gets amplified by quite a lot, especially if you're on really, really high FPS. I'm going to show you a clip right here of what happens if you're on really high FPS doing this. And yeah, weird stuff happens. We're on 60 FPS right now though, so the movement does get amplified, but not by a whole lot. And also because we can't really jump, we have this problem that how do we actually move ourselves upwards? Well, it all lies in the setup. So we're gonna try and do the setup on these stairs right now. And how exactly we're gonna do them is we're gonna try and get on top of the basically, okay, let me say it like this. First I'm gonna get one bucket on top of the other bucket. Then I'm gonna try and wedge one of those buckets, the one that is linked up, not the one I'm holding, the one that is linked up. I'm gonna wedge that one into the wall, into a corner, so then I can move upwards while the bucket can't move because it's wedged into the corner. By doing that, I can get on top of the bucket, and I'm gonna try and have the very first bit of movement that is happening while I'm on top of that bucket will be me moving just a few pixels upwards, me moving just 1 or 2 steps up the stairs while I'm on top of that bucket. And then I hope that that bit of movement gets caught by the bottom bucket in such a way that the amplification that I talked about earlier happens and I get flung upwards. Once I'm in the air, I need to be really careful because right next to me there's this observatory with a bunch of stuff swirling around at the top of it. If I hit any object while flying, it is very, very likely that the flight will just flat out cancel. I will fall to the ground and everyone will be really sad, especially me, because I just wasted like 5 minutes and I have to do everything over again. This is why it took me 4 hours to record this. Anyway, so when I'm in the air, I'm also going to have to try and somehow move forward. And this is where it gets really interesting, because if you move in any direction, what happens is, because you're usually spinning, I mean, it's extremely difficult to not accidentally spin, because every single bit of tiniest movement gets really amplified in the very, very first few frames that you get on top of that bucket. It's almost impossible to not have some sort of spin on you. Now, if you, for example, have the bucket, like for example, let's say that head kit is turned backwards. So the bucket is behind you and now you press forwards. What happens is head kit does a 180 forwards and is now trying to move forwards. But because you're doing a 180, you're spinning again. You're spinning again because you just did a 180. Even if you're almost exactly pointed forwards, like let's say you're like 20 degrees to the right and you point forwards, you're still turning 20 degrees to the left to move forward. And it's almost impossible to move exactly in the same direction that you're facing at any given point because you're spinning so fast. And because of that, you're spinning even more. You're adding spin left and right. Maybe you're making yourself spin leftwards really fast. Maybe you're adding some spin to the right. It gets really, really weird to try and actually figure out how to control the bucket correctly. And I put a bunch of other fails on screen right now as well, where I just couldn't really control the bucket at all. It's really, really finicky, and all I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get really high and then don't blink. I'm gonna just throw the bucket away, it's done its job, I'm really high, and I'm just gonna fall from space, from the sky. I mean, the timepiece is called She Came From Outer Space, and I just came from outer space, landed right on top of that mafia, and he's like, oh my god, she came from outer space, because he's not scared of us because we're slime monster. He's scared of us because we came from up there. That's right. Anyway, now the point where all the resets are over and I can be like, oh my god, it took me 4 hours to get here. Now I can finally, or 4 hours of resets rather, to get here. Now I can actually finish this entire stage. But turns out the rest of this is not very trivial at all, and I'm failing a lot here, and I'm gonna cut away all those fails as well, because it's gonna take a really long time to go through all of those fails. But while we do that, once again though, in the description there's a full uncut video, so you can see the entire attempt. It took like 13 or 14 minutes to do the entire thing. So while I'm cutting away that, we need to talk about ledge grabbing. So when you grab a ledge with head kit, which means is you're too high to do a wall run off the wall, but you're not quite high enough to land on top of the ledge, what happens is head kit does a ledge grab. And if head kit does a ledge grab, it's actually quite bad for the no A button challenge, because the problem that we have is we cannot actually get on top of the ledge without pressing A at that point, because if we're in a ledge grab, the only two options we can do is press A to get up or press the dive button to let go. Because we cannot press A, we have to let go. So the ledge grab is pretty much one of the worst things that can happen during a no A button press, because you're forced to let go and you just have to do everything over again. But, and this is something that also happened earlier when I did that weird jump over the light where I was talking about the no bonk badge, but I didn't actually grab the ledge. I actually grabbed the ledge and instantly went on top of it. And this is exactly where holding down the A button comes in, because as it turns out, which by the way, shoutouts to DS Henry273 for talking to me about this in one of my YouTube comments. If you hold down the A button and you are about to do a ledge grab, Headkit will just instantly jump on top of the ledge. So we don't actually have to press the A button. All we need to do is we have to have the A button held down while initiating a ledge grab, and we will actually be able to get on top of the ledge. And now we'll see the finished attempts where I am indeed able to make it all the way over. This is really finicky, by the way, because these jumps are extremely far, and it is actually possible in theory to make these jumps even without half an A press, but it's really, really difficult, and so far I think it has only been done tool assisted. Well, tool assisted, games slowed down by like 75% and then sped up in post. That's still kind of tool assisted, not real time. So if you're doing it in real time, these jumps are so incredibly difficult that I'm instead doing it with this. But I mean, I've talked about this before already. In TAS, this is 0A, but in real time, so far we were doing this in like 3 A presses, but now finally we managed to do it in half an A press in real time. So yeah, that is She Came From Outer Space in half an A press. What a giant adventure. It took us so much to get to this point. We started out with like 5 A presses where already we were doing stuff with unlocked FPS, with launching ourselves with no bonk badge, trying to figure out how the ice head works, and we figured out how the ice head works, and we're trying to figure out how far we can get with it. We kept chipping away at it, and now finally with bucket flying somewhat being under control, with the frame perfect or the 1 frame ice head jump allowing us to go really high, with the no bonk badge allowing us to go really far, with the A button held down allowing us to get on top of ledges. With all of those things combined, we finally managed to do it. She Came From Outer Space in half an A press. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys next time.